For those of you who are parents, have you ever lost your child? Our oldest was, when she was about 18 months, wandered off when we were at a friend's house. And for 20 minutes, we were absolutely terrified of while looking for her. And the other two were lost briefly as well. And so I understand a little bit about what it's like for parents whose children are lost. Ruth Parker, she had two boys, CJ and Billy, and they were abducted by their father 29 years ago. She said in the beginning, I bought them birthday cards and lots of presents, but now I just try to stay busy and distracted on those very days. I cannot begin to imagine the utter pain she has felt. But sometimes adult children do something that creates estrangement and lostness that also brings on pain as well. One woman writes, and she's actually created a group to help parents whose children do things to bring them in estrangement. And I would imagine she probably tries to help parents as well who have done things themselves. But anyway, she writes, it was close to midnight when the phone rang. I grabbed it fast. My husband was sick and had just settled down to sleep, and I was afraid it would wake him. I honestly don't remember most of what was said in that conversation, but thinking about it now still puts knots in my stomach. I remember Dan, her son, explaining in a very clear, very matter-of-fact tone that he'd never used with me before, that his fiance's family would not be coming to the rehearsal dinner that we had planned. At first, I was so shocked I didn't even reply. That's when he put his fiancée on the phone, and she said something like, well, that's my family. To which I responded that I didn't know what she meant. And Dan came back on and said something about me being unfriendly at the bridal shower the month before. I was stunned. Hearing his accusation hurt, and Dan knew me better than that. My husband and I were in disbelief. How could the person you loved your whole life act like that way? The next few days were sort of in waiting mode, just trying to keep busy. When Dan did call again, it wasn't to apologize or explain. He called to confirm that we wouldn't be at the wedding. When he said he was just confirming that we would not be at the wedding, that was because they needed to know for the number of plates. Tears slid down my cheek. I was his mother, diminished to a number on a catering order. I cannot begin to imagine what it's like to have your child, who is an adult now, be so influenced that he would create a rift in your relationship. And yet that's exactly what happens. When you bring your kids into this world, you almost have an idyllic viewpoint of or perspective of raising them and watching them, them being around as you grow old, and you loving them and caring for them, and they doing the same back. And whether it's, they get lost somehow or kidnapped when they're younger, or they do something when they're older that brings a rift between you and your relationship, there is a deep pain. And some parents, in talking to counselors, say, I'm a strong person, so why am I having such a difficult time getting past my adult child's betrayal? How can I move on? And one parent put it, it is a loss that is so different from other kinds of losses of children that you're frozen. You cannot grieve. You cannot finish the grieving process, because if you do that process, you've given up. One of the things that I've learning more and more about God is that if we're made in his image, then that means what we're like is what he's like. And we have these deep emotions. And so can you imagine the sadness that we feel as parents in either losing our kids when they're little because somebody abducts them, or because when they get older, they make the decision to end the relationship. Can you imagine the sadness then in the infinite being we call God? Well, I want to talk a little bit about the mission of God for the next, counting today, 4 weeks. 4 lessons on the mission of God. Now, the mission of God is different than the mission of the church. The mission of the church is to tell people what God has done for us. But the mission of God is actually to do for us what we could not do for ourselves. God decided to create us, and he created a paradise. Like I said, I remember when my kids came into the world, and I looked, and I've got these 3 wonderful kids, and they were, we actually, while raising them, I really appreciated the fact that I didn't have many of the problems with my 3 that others did. I mean, they weren't perfect. I wasn't perfect as a child, but I probably was worse as a child to my parents than they were to me. But God created this paradise. There was no death, no illness, no evil, no disasters, no accidents, nothing but goodness. And yet the 2 adults that he created decided that wasn't enough. They rejected God. They listened to someone else who didn't have their best interest at heart. And that someone else, of course, convinced them that they could be actually sort of gods on their own, or at least more like God in eating from that tree. But God had already told them they could eat from any tree except for that one, and there would be a consequence. And so God, then in Genesis chapter 3, begins to lay out that consequence. And then ultimately he exiled them from the garden. He kicked them out, and he put a cherubim to guard the way back in. But I think that he gave a clue to them and to those in the future that this exile would not be perfect. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. And I will put enmity between you, the serpent, and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. God's mission is, first of all, that the serpent's reign, now having taken over, is not going to be easy. He said, I'm going to put enmity between you, your seed, and the woman's seed. So the offspring of the woman would not necessarily just accept the serpent's rule and commandments every time that he spoke. So I think that there's a hint there that in the future there are going to be some of the children's seed who will be faithful, who will not give in, or at least who will not try to give in. And I think that that's kind of a hint that that this isn't over just yet, that there's still hope that's going to be. But he also gave a hint that there's going to be a battle. My translation says, he shall bruise you on the head, speaking of the woman's seed, and you shall bruise him on the heel. I don't know the full range of the word for bruise here. And bruise seems to me to be something interesting. I don't consider a bruise to be a very anything more than something minor. I mean, I have hit. When I was in 6th grade, we created. We took empty Coke bottles. You remember those, and put water in them and tuned them to where they would make a musical instruments. And I took 6 of them to school, but it was snowy and icy that day. And as I tried to get on the bus, I slipped and fell and broke all those bottles, and it bruised my entire finger. It was rather painful, but still, I mean, it was something that I got over. But I wonder what it's like to bruise one's head. The words crush and the words strike or batter are also used of this word. But I think the idea there is that there's some kind of a fatal blow to the head. And I'm sure that in bruising the head, where blood is released inside, that means that there's a death that is imminent there. But of course, at the same time, the serpent will bruise him, this seed of woman, on the heel. It's painful. And again, going back to that time I dropped the Coke bottles on my finger, and the actually the fingernail came off just about. It was extremely painful for a brief time, but I got over it, and now, of course, all my fingers work, and that finger works. But nonetheless, there's a hint that there's going to be a future battle. But you see, in this future battle, though, it's not God, well, seemingly so in this hint here that's doing the battling, it's the seed of woman. And so this would come through a human, the seed of woman. And God's sort of suggesting here that just as humans brought evil into the world, so a human in the future would be the one to bring goodness back into the world and rid the world of evil. Now, we know who that is, but still there's a hint there that's going on, that God is going to work, that he has a plan, he has a strategy. He's going to do something in the future that's going to change all that Satan did. So you see, what I'm kind of suggesting here is that look at God as a parent. He's brought children into the world, made it perfect for them, and given them everything that they need, and here they reject him, and they walk away. I think that there is a sadness and a depth of emotion there that we probably don't grasp very well. I know over the years I'm learning a little bit more about that. I think sometimes I don't stop to think about the depth of God's emotion when I'm reading Scripture, when I'm thinking about my relationship with him, and don't realize how much God grieves over what happened there in the garden, and how God continues to grieve over people throughout the world. I think sometimes as people read the Old Testament, all they see is God's anger, which is, again, another emotion. Just as we have anger over things in our lives, so God has anger over the fact that people have rejected him. But chapter 3, verse 15 suggests that God has a mission. His mission is to claim us back. His mission is to make sure that we have a way back to him, that we don't lose that way, that we know what it is. But it's not a way that we provide. God doesn't sit back. There are some who have taught, that God created this world, wound it up, put into place all the natural laws and so forth, but he takes a step back and doesn't participate in it. And so all the intervention that we claim we read about in the Bible is not God. Now, that's not the God that I read about in the Bible. This God actually participates. And what the whole Bible is about the mission of God to get us back into a relationship with him. That's God's mission, to provide that way. Yes, Jesus is the way, and we'll get to him a little bit down the road in this series. But nonetheless, what I want to kind of emphasize right now is the fact that there's a need for that mission. Now, even though we've talked a little bit about Adam and Eve rejecting, I think that Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, kind of solidifies the need for that mission and sort of propels that mission forward. Now, my translation, the New American Standard, reads, "Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive forever. My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. And the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, these were the mighty men of renown. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of his thoughts, of the thoughts of his heart, were only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved up in his heart. The Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals, to creeping things, and to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." I don't know much I know what I've read about the sons of God here being angels and taking wives for them of the daughters of men and so forth. And it does seem to me that this is kind of the lead in, that there's something evil going on, something that God didn't intend. But that's not my intent right now, to focus upon the possibility of the angels being here. What I want you to see in this passage is, first of all, humans are multiplying. And there's the suggestion that this means that evil is going all over the earth. And finally we come down, and in verse 5 it says, the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So there's a lot of wickedness going on in the earth, and every intent of his heart was evil. Now, I don't know whether things were so much worse back then than they are today. I mean, what would be different about today than back then? And whether or not God has made it possible for, for knowledge of him, at least to suppress some of our evil. But right now, the description is that everybody is evil. And yet, Paul later on in Romans chapter 3, quoting from several passages in Psalms, says that there's none who does good, none who are righteous. And we've all sinned. And so is this really a description about us that even in the best of us, we still are far less than what God created us to be? I don't know. But the description here wants us to see that humans are multiplying, and that takes wickedness all over the earth. And every intent was evil continually. And it says the Lord was sorry that he made us. Even when I had a little bit of difficulty with my kids, even when they didn't always see eye to eye with me, and even as adult children, when I don't necessarily agree with maybe choices that they make, I have never been sorry that I brought them into the world. I have always prayed for them. I've always trying to see the good in them. And maybe that's because, that's from my human perspective. But nonetheless, it kind of, when I look at God, I cannot begin to imagine what it's like for him to be sorry that he made us. He was grieved. And here again, there's a depth of his emotion that we don't really stop to consider, I think. And then he decided he'd blot out everybody, from man to animals to creeping things to birds of the sky. And it's not so much that he's, I think, angry with the animals and the birds and the creeping things and so forth. It's just he made them for us. And so why continue? Why keep together this whole thing? But I'm sorry that I made them. Excuse me. And yet, verse 8 says, but. Richard Rogers at Sunset School of Preaching used to say, you need to watch those buts in Scripture. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace. Noah found something that said that all was not lost. Judgment is left, but humans will find grace as well. Now, again, I don't think that this is suggesting that Noah did something that made God proud of him, that he put, that Noah was better than everybody else. But Noah's trust, Noah's desire to serve the Lord, and Noah's desire to do his will, even if it was flawed, brought grace to him. And God chose him in order to start his mission. Well, the mission's already been started, really. But you see, the mission of God is to find us, to give us a way back. It's to help us in spite of our estrangement from him. Yes, we've alienated ourselves, we've separated ourselves, but God is going to make all of that disappear. The mission of God is that he will faithfully find a way back for us, that he will fulfill that mission. He may grieve in making us, but he will grieve more in losing us, all of us. And so it's because he loves us, because he's compassionate towards us, and because he's slow to anger, that all of this comes about. His mission isn't there because we found him. His mission there is because he knows that without him, we can't find, without him doing something about it, we can't find him. So you see, there's the need for the mission of God is the fact that we are evil. We followed in the footsteps of our of the one man who brought disobedience and sin into the world, Adam. We followed in his footsteps. Every one of us is like that. But God is going to faithfully find a way for us back. Well, actually, he already knows the way. It was chosen back before the foundation of the world. But the Bible, though, is about God fulfilling that. And sometimes, we tend to read the Bible and find things that we need to do. We find things that inspire us and things that make us work harder, things that help us to survive, things that help us to endure. But instead, maybe we ought to read the Bible and see God in his unrelenting mission in providing a way back to him for us. Yeah, the need is there because we are, even today, you have to look around and see that we are evil. There is no doubt about it, but God gives us hope. Laura Hartless, that's her name. Her teenage daughter was missing as an endangered runaway for 3 months back in 2004. And she says costs such as taking unpaid time off from work, printing flyers, gas money for searches, and even stress medication contributed to her having to file for bankruptcy. Shady organizations offered to help if she paid them, but she says she had no money. But then she learned that someone, there's a group called Team Hope that she was in contact with, and she felt she could trust them, a volunteer that spotted her daughter at a soup kitchen in another state. Hartless said that she didn't have enough money to retrieve her. But fortunate, she says, her union raised the money for her, and she and her daughter were reunited. Laura shows us the fact that as parents, when we lose our kids, even if they make the choice to run away, that we are relentless in searching for them. And our search for them goes on and on and on. God's search went on and on for us. And if you're watching today, you need to know he's found you. He expects you to respond in simple trust. And I hope that you will do that. But he's found you. And if you're in his family, you need to remember that he's found you, given you his family. Stay because he faithfully fulfilled his mission to find you. And that tells you something about him. He didn't leave you behind. He didn't abandon you. He didn't forget about you in spite of how it might have felt over time. He fought for you. So hold on to him. So you see, the mission of God was to find all of us, because God may have grieved in making us, but he would grieve more in losing any of us. So if you haven't come to him, come back to him. And if you come to him, stay with him. God bless.